All right, now that we've got our model deployed to production and it's out there interacting with all of the new users and new data and bringing us some really good business insight, we need to monitor the model. So, of course, getting the model to production is an accomplishment and it's something that the whole team should be excited about. But once it's on production, it's not done. You have to keep watching your model to make sure that the performance doesn't deteriorate over time or that your model just doesn't go stale. So there are a few different reasons and places that will cause the model to go stale or maybe the performance to degrade, and we'll talk about that as we go through this lesson. But the main thing is once you have your model on production, you're not done yet. So you're going to be monitoring this model for different types of drift. And there are a few different types of drift to monitor for, but these two are the most common. So first, you have concept drift. And this is where the model and the actual business problems start to drift apart. So, for example, you might be building a machine learning model for a scooter company, like the Lime electric scooters that you might see around different cities. And you need to know where to put the scooters, how many to put there, and around what times of day you can expect to put them there. When you experience concept drift, that might lead to a change like people want bicycles instead of scooters. So that basically makes the whole question that your model is trying to answer obsolete. So you have to update your model to make sure that you're still solving the problem that you set out to solve, or if this problem has changed over time, it's also okay to start building a new model. So it's just being aware of the business context that the model is being used in once you've gotten to production. And then you have data drift. So this one is probably the most common form of drift, and it's where you start to get different types of data and different values for data that aren't expected. So let's say with our scooter example, you start to somehow get null values for the number of scooters in a certain area because people take them all and they don't bring them back to that area because they leave them in other places. So you might get null values for whatever feature that's associated with. Or you might end up with new data coming in. Maybe you want to factor in the weather for the particular time of day. Maybe you start to factor in events that are going on in different areas, and that changes the data that the model is working with. So, whenever you notice a change in data type or you start to notice new types of data that are coming in, that's when you start to get some of this data drift. And if you remember all the way back in our class, we mentioned having this ground truth reference. This is where it really comes in handy because when you're monitoring your model for drift, you do have to compare it against something, right? So it's important to have a ground truth for your data to know what data types you're expecting, what, I guess, columns of data you're expecting, or what fields from the user you expect to be entered so that you can establish that baseline to compare your production model and data against after it's been in production for a while and you start to notice a change in how well that model performs. So these are two types of drift that come up pretty often in machine learning projects. So just be aware of these two in particular. So let's take a look at an actual model monitoring tool. And this one is Evidently AI, and it's an open source tool. You should definitely go check out their repo, go check out their docs, and they have a pretty good community around the tool as well. So it's one that I've used on a few MLOps pipelines, trying to test out different tooling for the monitoring stage. So let's switch back over to VS Code, and I'll go to my new project directory, and you'll see this drift monitor.py file I've opened. So what we're doing here is basically taking advantage of a lot of built-in functionality from Evidently to generate reports that tell us if the model has drifted and in what respect the model has drifted. So you'll notice we'll check for data drift, we'll check for data quality, and this has to do with, again, those values we receive. If for some reason we start getting a bunch of null values where we would typically get strings, that might lead to lower quality data. It just depends on what we're expecting and how our model was built to handle things like that. But this is one of the checks that's built in. We have some regression testing to see if there's anything that's changed with the data, but it's reverted back to a previous state that we've had the data in. We've got this classification preset test where we can check if our model is making the correct classifications. And then we have our target drift, which is a little similar to concept drift. It's just where we try to make sure that the data points we receive get the correct label based on our ground truth. So we're just trying to make sure we check for any types of drift, any changes in our data as we implement this Evidently AI monitoring tool. So first you'll notice we import some data, and this is going to be like our ground truth. The data that we fetch, we're going to call that our ground truth data. So that's what we'll use to reference our production data against. So we've got all of these different data sets to establish our ground truth, and then we start to get into our reports finally. So what we're looking at here is a couple of different data sets. So we have one data set which is our ground truth, and we have another data set that's been loaded in from production. So we are taking this, running the production data set through our random forest classifier model, and we're checking to see how those predictions are with respect to our truth, like our reference data or our ground truth or source of truth, whatever you want to call it. And then we're also getting our predictions with respect to that data we get from prod. So once we have these, we can start to create those different drift reports. So that's what pretty much all this script does. It goes through and we get our source of truth data set, we get our production data set, we run them through our models, and then we use Evidently AI to generate these reports based on different thresholds that we've set, based on different configurations that we've set, and just making sure that we return a report for these different drift and data quality conditions that we want to monitor as this model continues to be used on production.